Okay, so I think we will be starting. Hello, everyone. Welcome to our Women Leadership series that is held through Interact. My name is Emily. I'm a tour guide and tour operator with Majdi Tours. Interact is the sister nonprofit organization of Majdi Tours, and its major program is the educational center that uses storytelling, art, and technology to help people connect across war-torn divides, whether those divides be political, cultural, ethnic, religious, or socioeconomics. And one of these projects under the Educational Center is this series of webinar. I would like to introduce Rev. Dr. Mae Elise Cannon. She's the Executive Director of Churches for Middle East Peace and an ordained pastor in the Evangelical Covenant Church. She holds multiple degrees, including an MDiv from North Park Technological Seminary, an MBA from North Park University of Business, School of Business and Nonprofit Management, and MA in Bioethics from Trinity International University. She has authored several books, including the award-winning Social Justice Handbook, Small Steps for a Better World, and edited A Land Full of God, Christians' Perspectives of the Holy Land. Her work has been highlighted in various media outlets, including the New York Times, the Washington Post, CNN, and more. Rev. Dr. Mae, I would like to welcome you as our moderator for today's webinar.
Thank you, Emily. Well, I'm grateful to be here with you all. Thank you for joining us. And I'm grateful for this conversation, although I certainly wish that the circumstances were different. I'm joining you from Washington, D.C. on the ancestral lands of the Anacostians and the Piscataway peoples. I'm grateful for this conversation on the importance of feminist thought in peacebuilding. And so I have the pleasure of introducing you to our two panelists today. I'll introduce them one by one, and then invite them to give us a brief introduction about their work, and to answer the question of, just briefly introducing why do they think, feminist thought is important, and what contributions do they think. We were laughing a little bit about the questions we have to answer and the fact that we're only going to be together about an hour. But to give us some brief thoughts about the contributions of feminist engagement in terms of peace building in general. So we'll start with Netta Leovy, who's a staff attorney of ALLMEP, which is a Women Lawyers for Social Justice. It's a civil society organization advancing women's rights. Leovy is co-leading the project to advance the implementation of the United Nations Resolution 1325 on women, peace, and security with Dr. Netta Leovy. Prior to joining ALLMEP, Netta was a documentary filmmaker and a journalist. Her films, The Women from the Bubble, Yes, Doc 2007, and World Class Kids from 2010 were screened in Israel and internationally, and won prizes in international film festivals. Netta also worked as a news correspondent and an anchorwoman for a national network, Channel 10, and as an editor at the daily Yediot Achronot newspaper.
Sorry for challenging you, yes.
I know, I studied biblical Hebrew, we didn't speak it. Forgive me. And as an editor and correspondent for several radio stations in Israel. So welcome, Netta, eager to be introduced and to hear some of your thoughts, please.
Okay, so thank you very much for having me here together with Nivine, who I'm always happy to share any panel with. I will maybe take a minute to say something about what does it mean, Itach Ma'aki. Itach and Ma'aki is with you in feminine tense, in Hebrew and in Arabic. We're an NGO, and this can answer your question also about the importance of the feminist thought in social justice, and of course in political and in peace and security issues, which I think we will mostly discuss today. But Itach Ma'aki is with you in Hebrew and in Arabic. We are an NGO that is combined of Jewish and Arab Palestinian citizens of Israel, women who are using the legal tools in order to advance social change, in order to advance feminist principles, in order to advance rights of women. And one of the issues that we, and me specifically, we're focusing on in one of our main projects is to advance the principles of UN Security Council Resolution 1325, Women, Peace and Security, which we will elaborate a little bit further later on. But this is 1325 is exactly why I'm here today, but it's also really a reminder of a tool that we sincerely need here in our area, especially in Israel and Palestine. It's a UN Security Council resolution from 2000, in which the Security Council, for the first time since its establishment, referred to women in any resolution, in any of its resolutions, and it referred to two basic facts. One is that women are severely affected by conflicts, by violent conflicts and armed conflicts, and on the same time that they are almost never in decision-making positions in solving or preventing these conflicts. And this led to the resolution, which is an international resolution and is very relevant not only to Israel and Palestine, but what we saw here, what we are living here every day in the last several months is exactly manifestation of how this lens, these 1325 lens, are so much needed. I will stop here and I will maybe elaborate further later.
Thank you, Netta. I'm so interested. You know, my background, I'm ordained as an evangelical pastor, and if you know anything about the evangelical world, it's very male dominated. And so the denomination I'm ordained in is one of the few that ordains women. I often have to say, not that kind of evangelical, lest you be concerned. But in terms of feminine thought in social justice, most of my work is on biblical justice. My PhD is on the history of American Protestant engagement in the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. And so my own work intersects a lot with the very work that you're speaking of. So thank you. I look forward to hearing more about the things you just introduced us to. Our second panelist is Nivine Sandouka. She's the Regional Chief of Staff with the Alliance for Middle East Peace, ALLMEP, to many of us. She is leading in the field of peace programming and gender mainstreaming. You'll have to explain to us, Nivine, what gender mainstreaming means. Previously, she worked with the German Association for Development Cooperation. I'm not going to try to pronounce that word or acronym. Say it again.
It depends if you have the old one or the new one. The new one is Ageamondo.
Yes, Ageamondo. There you go. Oxfam, CARE International, IPCRI, the Regional Organization for Peace, Economics and Security. She also runs an online-based initiative called, is it Judy?
Yeah.
From Me to You, that aims to connect women together and volunteers in several civil society organizations. So welcome. Please, introduce yourself, a bit about your work, and how would you introduce the importance of feminist thought in peace building?
Thank you so much, Doctor, and thank you so much also for Majdi Tours and Intersect for this opportunity, of course, and to be the voice of women who is usually ignored and not heard in times of conflict. And it's always an honor to be talking to Netta as well. She's a dear friend, and a sister as well in the fight for equality and peace as well. So the Alliance for Middle East Peace is basically the largest and growing and fastest network of the Palestinian and Israeli peace builders. It's as a collective, and I'm reading this, as the collective voice of our member organizations, we channel their ambition towards increased cooperation and political impact, making them more than the sum of their parts. So what that means is that we have 160 peace-building organizations. Some of them are cross-border, work cross-border, some of them work in shared society, some are working within the Palestinian society, and some of them working within the Israeli society. And all of them are basically working towards ending this conflict and finding a justice solution for the Palestinians and the Israelis alike, security and peace for everybody. So, for us at ALLMEP, we support them basically to build their capacity, to have more a voice, to have their voice heard, let's call it. And ever since the 7th of October, our work has really been focusing a lot on advocacy and basically the need to stop managing the conflict and actually going into negotiations and finding a resolution for this conflict. Because we cannot keep this living in this cycle of violence that doesn't have a horizon. And right now, we, together with our members, are all united on that front and giving that same message. Now, where does feminism and where does women come in this? Feminism is actually the approach that we use, because feminism is all about peace building, it's all about solidarity, it's all about acknowledging each other's rights and, you know, solving conflicts in peaceful means. And that's basically the approach that ALLMEP uses. Within ALLMEP itself, there are a couple of organizations that are actually movements of women. You have Women Wage Peace, that is basically a movement of Israeli women that are calling for peace. And then you have their sister movement in Palestine, Women of the Sun, which is a Palestinian women movement that is also calling for ending the occupation. And both of them are mothers and daughters, sisters, women coming together to say enough is enough. And we need a better life for ourselves and our families as well. And our role as ALLMEP is basically to support them in whatever they need to do. And of course, we can elaborate a little bit further on how this conflict, specifically since the 7th of October, have impacted women more so than men.
And that's where I wanted us to actually start, was to talk about how would things look differently, you know, when we're looking at October 7th and what the world is calling, you know, the war between Israel and Hamas. You know, how would things look differently if there was feminist leadership, if women were involved? You know, you had mentioned, Netta, you know, the two things that the UN Resolution 1325 is seeking to address. The second one is that almost never are women involved in decision making. And so how would things look differently in the current reality if women were involved in leadership? From both of your perspectives.
Nivine, do you want to start?
Okay. Oh, go ahead.
I think that the answer, or part of the answer, is something that we felt in Israel immediately after October 7th, and this is the difference, the gap, the enormous gap between the leadership and the citizens, the civil society organizations. The gap between the way citizens and civil society organizations immediately volunteered and tried to bring all of their human resources to help whoever needed was quite amazing. On the other hand, the leadership, where there isn't even a slight of feminist perspective is really a very, very far away word for our leadership. But even a perspective of human rights, of women's rights, this is something that is very that is usually rare. It's not only in the Israeli government that there are not a lot that there are not a lot of women. This is something that it's all over the world. But in Israel, as you might know, a little bit more than a year ago, there was established the government that is another government that is led by Benjamin Netanyahu, and is also including and is based on a coalition that is based on extreme rights, on settlers that are really leading us and leading the decisions, and women's rights is really the least of their problems. So I think, but on the other hand, you could see almost immediately the way the citizens and the civil society organization were able to give empathy, to give answers. Not all of them are exactly my taste, but for example, I can give you one example. Nivine and I are members of a joint steering committee, a joint 1325 steering committee of women from Israel and from the West Bank, Jewish and Palestinian, from different groups in society. And we decided to meet, despite whatever happened, to meet immediately after October 7th. And I remember when we set the date for that meeting, we weren't sure that there will be women that will show up to this Zoom meeting. And many of the members, almost all of them, showed up and shared their feelings. And we had a safe space because one of the issues that I must emphasize now is that in Israel these days, it's dangerous to talk, okay, to speak out loud, to bring criticism on the government, to speak against the war. This is dangerous. And it's not funny at all. It's more dangerous to my colleagues, to my Palestinian citizens of Israel colleagues in Ittach Ma'aki and in other civil society organizations, but also for Jewish activists. So we created a safe zone, a safe space for us, civil society activists from Palestine and from Israel, to overcome this horrific events, and to be able to speak together and to act together. So I think that the answer I mean, again, your question is very, very broad. But I do think that one of the answers to that is in this word jointly, working jointly together. This is the way that we overcome this terrible days. We at Ittach Ma'aki in our organizations and also with our partners in the other organizations. So I think partnership and working together is the answer, is the feminist answer to that.
That's true. So just to add to that, I mentioned that feminism is a core value of what ALLMEP actually does in general. And just to take us a little bit back to the theory itself. So how do feminism basically look at war in times of war? So there are two different theories. One of them that basically claim that war is an undeniable fact of modern life, and may sometimes be a precondition of a permanent peace. So there's peace towards the end of it, but there should be like kind of war as a precondition. The other theory, which I think we all in the peace building basically belong to, is basically says it's a rejection of militarization and of war. And it actually offers a deeper understanding of the roots of the violence. And then basically, it also speaks about solidarity with the oppressed and those who are affected by violence. And this is basically the core value that is governing our work as organizations that work in peace building. It's all about the solidarity, it's all about the human value, and it's about the recognition of the narratives, which is extremely important in this conflict. Part of this conflict is that both the Palestinians and the Israelis don't understand the narratives and the trauma that each people actually carry together. I was not born in 1948. Netta was not born during the time of the Holocaust, but we inherited this trauma. And as long as we don't understand this inherited trauma and the roots of the violence, we will not be able to move forward with peace. So something that we can offer as feminism is basically, if it was there, if it was in the decision-making level, I think that right now we wouldn't even be talking here about this. Because the 7th of October would not have happened, because from the beginning, we would have leaders, courageous enough leaders to actually say, we are not going to manage the conflict. We need to find a solution based on the understanding of each other's narratives and needs, which is basically the national aspirations of both peoples, the Israelis and the Palestinians. And until now, we did not find such courageous leaders who understand those aspirations. Unlike the peace building, where we actually do understand the root causes and we do understand the aspirations, and all the time we are trying to build those bridges between one another to meet those demands and those needs. It has been extremely challenging since the 7th of October. Even before that, it didn't start. The conflict did not start on the 7th. So even before that, it was extremely challenging. But I think right now we understand that we need this approach more than ever. We need to actually right now think a lot about trauma healing, psychosocial support, understanding the roots of the violence, and then moving forward from understanding the narratives towards building a shared vision for both people. And that's basically what most of us are doing, using the pillars or the values of feminism.
Thank you. There are several things you both just said that I think are quite profound. I just returned 3 days ago from more than 2.5 weeks in several countries in the Middle East. I was in Israel and the occupied Palestinian territories. I was in Jordan and Lebanon. We were supposed to be in Iraq, and then I ended up going back to Israel because of escalations in the broader Middle East. And one of the things that I was leading a delegation for Churches for Middle East Peace, that was a peace, delegation. And personally, I had never experienced more division and more separation between societies. So when you talk about a feminist principle of coming together and even at risk of, safety and security and it being dangerous to come together, it's quite profound that as early as October 7th, you brought people together. That's really, I'm not saying it lightly to say that that's beautiful and profound. And one of the things I also heard, which relates to another thing that you talked about in terms of narratives, but I heard from Israeli friends and from Palestinian friends, the isolation of the narratives. And even in the news, the way that, many Israelis are just not being exposed to the realities of what's happening in Gaza. And many, many people in the Palestinian territories, there's such a distrust anyway of Israeli narratives, but, even of the story of what happened on October 7th, that there is such an isolation of the narratives of that day, and even just since October 7th, what's happened. Mm-hmm. So when you talk about the importance of the recognition of narratives, being a feminist principle, those things are quite profound, particularly in this moment, and are so desperately needed. One of my questions, and I will, just for those listening, I see, please use the Q&A function in about 5 minutes or so, maybe 10 minutes. I will open it up for those who are with us to be able to ask some questions. So please feel free to use that Q&A function. But one of my questions for you both is, what role does civil society play, and how can we help foster those principles? If solidarity with the oppressed, if coming together in terms of separation, if acknowledgement of a multi-narrative perspective, if these are feminist principles, or elevating the voices of women. We at Churches for Middle East Peace, we have a program called End Still We Rise that's about empowering women to engage in peace building. It's based on the Maya Angelou poem.
I was going to say that, yeah. And
yes, that's where it comes from. And I want to introduce you, to our leaders on the ground too. I'm eager for them to be connected to your work. But how can civil society engage and support the efforts that you're speaking of?
Okay, Nivine, do you want to start?
Please.
No, go ahead.
Are you asking about civil society in international, I mean, not in Israel and Palestine, or in local?
I think all of the above. I mean, I think, many of us
actually, when you asked me, I wanted to share, because I wrote to myself that I have to share something optimistic. So I have one really optimistic example of and quite an amazing initiative that was led by a colleague of mine in the southern of Israel, again from our organization, from Itach Ma'aki, but in the south, we have Bedouin Women's Center Rights. And the lawyer Hanan Asana, she leads the center, and in the days after October 7th, since October 7th, the women, Jewish and Palestinian and Bedouin women, and all the people in the area, in the Negev, in the south, in these areas, were under attack. Where one of my colleagues, her house was ruined in the first hours of the war, and this was something I'm talking now about inside Israel. Yes, this is in the Negev, in the south of Israel, and just in a couple of days, my colleagues in the Negev, they established a joint emergency center of Bedouin and Jewish families that were affected by the war. And this is an amazing initiative that was, they established a center, a physical center, where the families can also get supplies and also get self-care and psychosocial support and other assistance that they have. And this project is led by 24 women volunteers from the unrecognized villages, the unrecognized Bedouin villages in the Negev. And this is, again, quite an amazing project, which I think is again, has the essence of acting together. It has been done by our team in the south, together with an organization called When Did You See the Horizon Lately? And together they created this amazing center. And whoever goes there, I mean, if some of the audience here live in Israel, they can go there to the center, and whoever goes there comes out of that center with inspiration and with slight optimism. So that is one example. And I think that the other one is echoing women voices. Echoing, because women voices and feminist voices are, as Nivine said in the beginning, this is something that is hardly heard in the Israeli media. The military is very, very the military is very, very dominant in Israel, in society, in politics and everywhere. And of course, also in the media. And in times of war, the women disappear, and the women perspective disappear. So echoing the women voices, the civilian voices, the human voices, I think this is something that each one of the people here also can help us do.
Yeah, just to echo what Netta was saying, and first of all, I need to apologize. I'm recovering from a virus, so I'm sorry for that. Just echoing what Netta said. Basically, we need to remember that the people who actually pay the highest price in any war or any conflict are actually women and children. And just to give you some numbers specifically from Gaza, sorry, Netta, I don't have it gender desegregated in the Gaza envelope. Maybe you can provide it. So according to the latest UN reports, 2 mothers are killed every hour. 7 women are killed every 2 hours. And then you have the total number of casualties, almost 27,000. More than 50% of those are women, and 10,000 of those are children. So just looking at those numbers, you will understand that the ones who actually need the most protection and the ones who are paying the highest price are women and children. And we know that in times of war, they are also, their bodies are being used as, if might call it, weapons of war. Whether they sexual violence against them, but they also have a lot of, they bear more of also psychological burden on them as well. It affects their well-being, of course, like everybody else, but for them it's more. And if you think about it, after the war or even during the war, the gender roles also become so different, because you're talking about women suddenly finding themselves displaced, not in their safe home. How are they able to protect their children? How are they going to protect themselves? How are they going to take care and provide for their children as well, which is the primary role, basically, if we're talking about women in a family. But then after the war, having to lose her husband or the family provider in sense of economic provider, what is she going to end up doing, especially if she doesn't have the means in order to fulfill that economic gap? If she doesn't have the education, if she doesn't have the experience, the language needed, how is she going to fulfill those? And then you find most of the households that are headed by women and females are actually the ones that continue to live in poverty. It's one of the results of the war, if we're also talking about the day after. The other thing that we need to remember as well in times of war is that the response is usually gender blind. And maybe that's also when I'm going to connect it with gender mainstreaming as well. When you talk about gender mainstreaming, it's basically looking at the needs of women, children, boys, and men differently, because it's not the same needs. This is gender mainstreaming. Whenever you want to do a program, you look at the different needs so that you build a program or a project responding to the different needs. And here we're talking about equity rather than equality. And at the same time, if you look at war and you apply gender mainstreaming, what we find out is that response is also gender blind. What does that mean? If you look at women right now, every month we have, the monthly what do you call it, PMS. So women have specific needs, and today we hear that women and those needs are not being met in Gaza. It adds another layer to giving birth without any kind of epidurals, to basically having to be being wounded from the war and not having enough medicine and medications. And now it adds another level that even the humanitarian response that is actually, if it goes into Gaza, doesn't take that into account either. It's gender blind also because when we do the day after the war, as Netta mentioned, the voices of women who are mostly affected by war are not heard. They're not represented at the negotiation table. Their needs are not being taken into consideration. Now that all brings me to what we do as civil society. So the response basically of some of our members have been specifically to look at the needs of the women in Gaza specifically, and trying to provide as much as possible the needs that they want as women. We also have been talking a lot about the stories of peace builders who lost their lives, whether we're talking about Vivian Silver, an Israeli Jewish leader in the field of peace building who was killed in Kibbutz Be'eri. And she is a founder of Women Wage Peace. She's the founder of ALLMEP and many other peace building. And she was killed on the 7th of October. Or if we are talking and raising the voices of the women who are alumni of peace-building projects in Gaza who were also killed. So I would like to take a moment to remember them as well, and how courageous they were to put peace at the forefront of their work and to be part and participants of peace building. And they paid with their lives as well. So we remember them. Again, the humanitarian response that we do as well. But what is more importantly is that when we talk about the day after, it also includes women in that discussion. It's not only men who are talking about interests of their own interests, but we're also talking about what does it mean as Palestinians? What does it mean, the term liberation? To liberate who? Are we only talking about a political liberation, or does liberation actually mean equality of women? Are we also talking about who is our partner in this? What is the end goal that we want to do in this? Is it just from a men's perspective that we want to govern, or do we actually want a vision for our country? I'm talking as a Palestinian now. Or do we want basically the country that where we live to be built on basis of equality and human rights and equity, basically women and men leading together? So it's many questions, and all of these questions are being put on the table by the members of ALLMEP, by the members who actually decide to work on peace. Look at it from the government perspective or the politician's perspective. They don't talk about these issues. It's not even on the table. And that's exactly what we are doing, contrary to them.
Thank you, Nivine. I want to be sure to catch, Netta, what was the name of the, I think it was you who mentioned the center in the Negev. What was the name of that center?
It's called the Joint, I will send on the chat the link for more information about it, but it's called the Joint Emergency Center. It's based in Abu Tlul, which is one of the Bedouin villages. It was based in Rahat, and now it's based in Abu Tlul. And there are also centers in each one of the villages. I will send some more information on the chat.
Okay, that's excellent. And we've had quite a few questions come through, so I'd love to start to work through those as much as we're able. Are there any female Knesset members who support the UN Resolution 1325, and do they support you to meet and to speak out?
Well, that is a huge question, but there are not a lot of women Knesset members that support 1325. That is the short question, the short answer. I will say that throughout the years since the resolution was passed in 2000, the Israeli Knesset was quite active in this field. And it even advanced a law saying, and we have a law in Israel that says that whenever the government is establishing a team, also a negotiation team, a peace negotiation team, it has to have a representation of women, including women from diverse communities, which is quite a progressive legislation. However, it's not being implemented at all. And even these days, you can see there are deliberations. There are all the time. There are deliberations now about the hostages, about the ceasefire, and there are almost no women there, and no gender perspective on the table. So the answer is that there are Knesset members that were throughout the years, but it's scarcely implemented, these principles. And the second part of this question is, again, the Knesset since the last elections in November 2022, sorry. The Knesset, there are a lot of there's not a lot of Knesset members at all, feminist Knesset members, male or female, that support 1325. We still do have some partners and some Knesset members that we work with.
Thank you. I think this question would be for you, Nivine. This is actually about some of the statistics. It's just a question about why or how are women dying twice as much in terms of, I think they're talking about the statistics that you were mentioning in terms of Gaza.
I think it's because I don't know why. I'm not a statistician myself. And so these are according to UN statistics. I would assume because for women, they are living together with their children, so their mobility becomes a little bit more difficult. But at the same time, women are staying in whatever shelters they are in that are being bombed. And we know there are airstrikes right now of where civilians are actually staying. So that might be another reason why the number for women is higher. The other reason might be just that this is generally speaking, the number of women in that society is higher than the number of men. Plus, men usually go to in Gaza. They're going if they are militants, they are going to to war. And who's left behind are mostly women and children. And that's my cat saying hello. Yeah. So again, that would be my own analysis of it, basically.
Thank you. The next question is about a topic that I know has gotten quite a bit of media attention. And the question is, what would you say to women or others, I would add, who do not believe that Israeli women were raped or have experienced sexual violence and death on October 7th?
What would we say?
What would you say? What would you say to people who do not believe that? Yeah, the question is who do not believe that Israeli women were raped or experienced sexual violence and death on October 7th. Mm-hmm.
Okay, I think that this question I can answer. I think it refers to two topics. One is the issue of sexual violence, which I think is very important issue that I will refer to. The other is a more broad question about fake news and which I'm having trouble answering now. Maybe Nivine will have a better answer than me. But about the sexual violence, this is something that is quite shocked the Israeli society and also Israeli women organizations, because this is something that usually when, for example, I've been advancing the issue of women, peace and security in Israel for many, many years. And usually when we're speaking about this issue, the usual answer is, okay, but in Israel, in Palestine, the sexual weapon is not being used, as opposed to former Yugoslavia and the case of Rwanda in the 90s, where rape was used as a weapon in these wars. So this answer, by the way, we knew throughout the years that this is not correct. But this was the sense, this was the feeling in Israel among Jewish Israelis. And suddenly this was, this was horrifying, shocked, and it's a real, it gave a real sense of terror, of horror for every woman and not only women. And this is exactly the reason for the need to implement 1325 in a broad way, realizing that sexual violence is a tool of war in many senses. First of all, when straight after the horrific stories about the sexual attacks on women in October 7th were spread out in Israel and were published in Israel, almost immediately after that, we got more and more reports about Israeli soldiers that started using harassments also against Palestinians in a more I don't know how to say it exactly. It's as if they feel a need to defend the honor of the women, of the Israeli women. And this is what terrifies me more than anything in this issue, that the sexual violence and the harassment and the sexual violence will become spread out in our terrible conflict. So this is my great fear, and this is something that I think that this is our advocacy efforts are aimed at that dimension, calling on international bodies to say that the sexual violence towards all women and not only women is something that needs to be protected of, and that is super dangerous and is very, very dangerous to anyone, of course. But when it becomes part of a conflict, of a bloody and armed conflict, it's very, very dangerous and frightening.
I think Netta said everything, so I'm not going to add anything to that.
Thank you. And maybe this will be the last question, because and I'm sorry we won't get to all the questions, but I want to give you each the opportunity for some closing comments. Just this question is, are there responsibilities or programs advocated by Arab women who are not Israeli citizens? So far, I've only heard criticisms of the Israeli government or positive programs within Israeli society. What are advocates outside of Israel? Where or what programs might there be? And I'm curious, Nivine, if you had thoughts in that regard.
I mean, advocates for what exactly? It's not...
I think related to Arab women outside of Israeli society was the way I understood that question. Like,
okay. So, I don't know if we're talking about basically advocates for women's rights in general. Yes, they have been putting a lot of statements, specifically, at least I'm aware of a couple that put out statements calling for basically protecting human rights and that and specifically women's rights, but also that all human lives is of value. So not specifying it only for Palestinians and for Israelis. And just 2 days ago, I ran across basically something called The Collective, which is Muslim women's rights activists. And basically, they were condemning the rising anti-Semitism. And they had a whole webinar to talk about it. So it's basically, that's again, when we talk about feminism. Feminism does not differentiate based on nationality. It's not going to only talk about what happened to what is still happening to the Palestinian women, but it's also going to be talking about and condemning what happened to the Israeli women as well. And again, we're not only talking about the 7th of October, we're talking about 50 years plus of this conflict going on, and feminist movements, not only in Israel and Palestine, are condemning that, but also in the region and worldwide. Right now, unfortunately, I don't have specific names besides the one that I ran across by coincidence, but I'm sure if you Google it, you'll be able to find them.
Thank you. I'll also put some resources in the chat. I mentioned the program that we have, And Still We Rise, which launched actually in Washington, D.C. with both Israeli and Palestinian women. We brought women from other parts of the Middle East, from Lebanon. Lebanese women and Palestinian women couldn't meet. We had to bring them to D.C. so that they would be able to connect. And we just launched a podcast from that community. Things have gotten so difficult between the two communities. When you were talking about being multi-narrative, the Israeli community and the Palestinian community are not meeting now together. They're meeting separately, but we are having a gathering in Jericho in November of 2024 that will be on women's empowerment. And I'll put information about that in the chat as well. That's a part of our And Still We Rise program for Churches for Middle East Peace. It's multi-faith. Even though we're a Christian organization, because there was a question about religious organizations that are working on feminist peace building efforts. So I would love to give each of you the opportunity in our last few minutes, just closing remarks on things you most would want us to know or opportunities for people to engage or support your work. If you would, share your last thoughts with us, please.
Go ahead, Netta. I'll go afterwards.
Okay, so I have two notes I want to end with. One is the issue of that I think is very relevant for international community, which is choosing sides. This is something that we are feeling on our flesh, the way that that people around the world feel the need to be on one side. And it's very, very clear. It kind of connects to what I said in the beginning about the gap between the leadership, the political leadership, and the citizens. And I want to remind you all that the people that are most affected by these choosing sides are the people, are the citizens and the feminists. And we want, and I think that it was in one of our discussions of the joint 1325 steering committee, someone said, we want to choose the feminist side. We want to choose the women's side. This is our side, and this is my call to choose the joint side of citizens, of women, of children, of life and humanity. The other note is something of as a note referring to a project that we led a year ago in Itach Ma'aki. First of all, in Itach Ma'aki, I'm co-leading the project together with the Palestinian citizen of Israel, because again, we think that leading it together, talking about the Palestinian-Israeli conflict and the occupation cannot be led only by a Jewish lawyer or a Jewish activist. It has to be done together, despite difficulties and challenges. And one of the things that we held was a training program for women, 50 women in Israel, for peace negotiation from a gender perspective. When we published the call for participants for this training program, we were astonished by the numbers and quality of the women that approached and submitted their applications. There were hundreds of submissions and applications for these 50 seats that we had for these training. And this showed us the thirst and the feeling of women from diverse communities. They were Palestinian citizens of Israel, Jewish citizens of Israel, religious women from migrant background, from Ethiopian, from Russia migration to Israel. And they were women from government offices, from municipalities, from civil society, and they all felt that they want to be part of decision-making in peace and security. And they want to be part of track 2, which is unofficial peace negotiations, and track 1, when we'll get to that part. So this is my note for the ending. Know that there are women in Israel and in Palestine that have a lot to give, their perspective, their knowledge, their tools that they learned with us and that they had before they joined our training. I will also share in the chat we have a website with the alumni that whoever, if there is among the people in this audience, people that want to reach out to them, to speakers, to listen to them. If you initiate a conference, you can reach out to each one of them and get their perspective, diverse perspective. And I think this is, again, an attempt to end up with an optimistic note.
There's very little that has encouraged me these days, Netta. And so it's good to have some things that are encouraging. So thank you for that. Nivine, please.
I would like to add to that one is, first of all, I fully agree with you, Netta, not to be pro this or pro that, because it's only spinning inside and outside, if I might say. It's outside, it's stirring Islamophobia, and it's also igniting anti-Semitism. And that, when it happens in the world, for us here, it has its own repercussions as well. So it's kind of like to be informed about the situation here and basically be pro-peace and both pro-human rights. And these are the principles that we have been talking about here today. The other thing is, I would really encourage you to look at our website, allmep.org. It's in the chat, to get informed about all the 160 peacebuilding organizations that do the work that we do. The other thing that we are calling, and if you are an activist in anything, please support us in our call that we need a multilateral peace building process, which means that more than one country should be involved in basically the peace building and negotiations that are going to happen, to pressure both the Palestinians and the Israelis to go into that process, to support as well as to support a final status agreement based on a two-state solution. These are the things that we would really like you, if you're an activist, you can lobby your governments about those issues. The other thing, and the most pressing issue right now, is to be supportive, as I said, of pro-human rights, which means basically a release of the hostages that goes hand in hand with a permanent ceasefire. Right now, especially if we're talking about women, we need to make sure that the humanitarian assistance is getting in and people are not starving, especially in this very cold weather. We have very cold weather here in Israel and Palestine. So these are the things that, from a feminist perspective, we should always be active to make sure that we are pushing for those values and those demands.
Much gratitude to you both. Thank you for your courage and for your work and for your efforts. May they be powerful and effective. So thank you so much.
Thank you so much for this opportunity. Thank you. Thank you, Emily and Dr. Mae. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Rev. Dr. Mae, for moderating this call. Thank you to everyone who attended this webinar. And I would like to invite you, if you would like to see more wonderful women speaking about the peace movement and leadership in Israel and Palestine, join us for the next webinar in February 15th, where we will have Women Wage Peace and Women of the Sun, the two movements that Nivine just spoke about. And also, I would like to put in the chat that if you want to take an action furthermore, you're welcome to join our Majdi trips, solidarity trips, that will be meeting activists on the ground, Israelis and Palestinians, upcoming in March, and we will have furthermore in the upcoming months. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you. Good night.
Thank you.
Good night.